Disney's Onward is the latest animated film from Pixar and takes place in a world that has evolved from an enchanted land with magic and unicorns and dragons and trolls and elves, etc., 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 into a more modern world like ours with the technological advances. We follow two brothers, played by Tom Holland and Chris Pratt, as on the former's birthday, Tom Holland's character's birthday, their mother gives him a magic staff with the power to bring the boy's deceased father back for one full day to spend with both sons. The problem is the spell doesn't fully work, and only the bottom half of their father materializes. So now both boys must go off on a quest to find a way to bring their father back fully, you know, instead of just, like, waist down. They have to find a way to bring their father fully back before time runs out. And if you know anything about me, you know that I love Disney, but more importantly, I love Pixar. I personally think they've only faltered maybe twice, notably Cars 2 and The Good Dinosaur. I think those, yeah, I would say that those are the only two true bad, in my opinion, Pixar movies, and I'll tackle those whenever I get around to those reviews. But every other film that they've made has ranged from being either good to being straight-up masterpieces of animation and even narrative filmmaking. So I was excited when the first trailer came out. It didn't give us much as a trailer, as an initial teaser shouldn't give us too much, but it at least showed off the concept of this world, and I was sold on it immediately. Then the subsequent trailers came around, and my excitement noticeably lessened. I didn't feel the quality that films like Up or the first two Toy Story films or even Coco had. It felt more like we would see something that was a bit more in the middle, kind of like Monsters University, something that was good but maybe not the most memorable in my opinion. And it's actually funny that I say Monsters University, because that was the directorial debut of Dan Scanlon, who is the director of Onward. So yeah, I was thinking, wow, with the look at these trailers, he can't possibly get better than his last movie. It's just going to be about the same. But now, sure, I don't want to limit his potential with that. I was just, that was where my mind was, and, you know, whether that's good or bad or indifferent, take that as you will. Now, sure, the marketing campaign had some good laughs, like the scene where they try to enlarge the gas canister. That one's pretty funny, but other than small moments like that, I just looked at the marketing campaign up to this and just thought, okay. I'll also admit that going into the film, if it wasn't for Tom Holland being cast in the upcoming Uncharted film, if it ever does actually get made, I would be worried that Tom Holland was being typecast into that nice, awkward, lovable, dorky role that he's been in with many of his recent roles in the more casual, audience-reaching and blockbuster films, especially with Spider-Man and the Sony Animation Spies in Disguise with Will Smith. I'm still worried that that is happening a little bit, but we shall see in the future. Anyway, now I'm done with the rambling, so I'm about to go out to the theater and actually see the movie, but before I actually head out, I want to throw out my normal disclaimer for those of the uninitiated. So, you know, just... Sorry, I lost my train of thought. My normal disclaimer so that those of you who are new to the channel will understand how I'm going about this, because I have had some people tell me that it's a little bit confusing, but, you know, as long as I throw it out there, it should be a little bit less confusing, I hope. But anyway, the format that I use, the way that I convey my thoughts is I do a pro and con list. It helps me to best catalog the good and the bad, in my opinion. And while I try to keep the sections separate, there are times where I'll actually make them work off of each other, especially if I can make them work off of each other, or if the pro and con is intrinsically tied together, then I will almost always take advantage of that. Take advantage of that. Yeah. Okay. Anyway, there's your disclaimer. I'll see you guys again when I finish with Onward.
In times of old, the world was full of wonder and magic. But times change.
You have a gift from your dad. He just said to give you this when you were both over 16.
No way! It's a wizard staff. Dad was a wizard.
What? Your dad was an accountant.
This spell brings him back. For one whole day, Dad will be back. Whoa, feet!
It's getting harder to hold!
Ah, he's just legs. I definitely remember Dad having a top part.
Okay, so I actually had to leave. I had to leave the showtime early because the showing was not listed as a 3D showing, and that's not why I left. It's just for those of you who know that I don't like 3D as a way to view a movie anyway. But the 3D effects were absolutely terrible. Every time that there was movement, and it's not for the movie, I don't think. I think it was just the theater that I was in. Just for some reason, it was not working, and it just gave me a really, really bad headache. But every time there was movement, the screen would be blurred to the point where viewing the animation at work was extremely difficult, and it was already difficult with tinted film over my eyes from the glasses. I was only really able to watch the entire short film beforehand, which was a Simpsons short. I had really forgotten that it was going to come out, otherwise I would have talked a little bit about it before I went into the movie, but saw that. It was really cute, but the blurred movement in that short from the 3D effects made it even harder to focus. And while it improved with the actual feature presentation, which was in 3D animation compared to The Simpsons having 2D animation, it wasn't by much, so because of that I left. Anyway, there's another showtime tomorrow. I'm just gonna go to that one, and you know what, fuck it. I'm gonna keep this in, so cut to tomorrow. Okay, now we can actually get started on the actual review, because I was actually able to sit through the showtime this time. It wasn't in 3D, thank God. Anyway, so I'm going to start with the cons. I know that I normally try to go for the pros, unless I just really do not like the movie, but I'm going to try something new. I feel like this will be better in the long run. But anyway, starting with the cons. This film was a mostly mixed bag for me when it came to the overall narrative. It took me a while to truly care about what was going on. Sure, the concept of trying to bring the dad back was interesting, but the execution in the first act, to me, was lackluster. And it did get better with the second act, but what was wrong in the first act was still present for much of the second act. You know, the story and the story beats were predictable. You could see them coming from a mile away. Even character progression felt too predictable and familiar for a, what's the word? I'm blanking. Oh, sort of coming-of-age film. It felt familiar to that. And, you know, this being a story that focuses on two younger people who are trying to find themselves in life, one more than the other, granted. And one thing that I wished was more focused on was the actual universe that these animators had created. One thing that I loved about Coco was that the world did serve the story, but they used the story also to better flesh out the world and the concepts and the culture as well. And they do it kind of in here, but not in the same way, and to a much, much, much smaller scale. Naturally, it wouldn't have been an issue if the narrative was much better written than it is for the first two-thirds, and it didn't help that for the majority of the film, the plot revolved around these two main characters trying to save what is basically a pair of pants that can barely communicate with them in the first place. It personally made it harder for me to connect in general with what was going on. Half of the jokes didn't even land either, most of them occurring in the first and second acts, the ones that didn't really necessarily work for me. Oh, excuse me. Usually with Pixar, like Marvel, you figure that they'll have the normal stuff, like the moments that make you laugh throughout, and you know, how every Pixar film has those moments where they make you cry. Some people call them, like, emotional manipulation. I'm not at the point where I agree with that, but I'm not going to say that they don't have any points. But anyway, that's a completely different topic for another day if that ever needs to come up, which it probably will eventually. But anyway, the normal stuff, moments that make you laugh throughout, just like Marvel, you have those in there, but for the first half of the film, maybe a couple of the jokes landed. Many felt set up artificially and also unnaturally, which I guess is kind of pretty much the same thing as artificially, but that's arguing semantics. The point is, I didn't find the humor in this film very, well, humorous. But the humor did get better, just like the story itself. As we got into the latter half of the film, the quality just began rising. I found myself being more charmed by what was going on, and even enjoying myself. Hell, they even had a point. There was even a point where I actually did start to care about this pair of pants that I was talking about earlier. But excuse me, the film truly hits a stride in the third act. At this point, the film becomes less structured, and by that I mean it wasn't following the cliches and predictable notions that I would have expected based on the first 2/3 of the film. They actually started doing some rather risky things that I believe pay off immensely, including something special involving the dad himself that was tackled in a completely different angle than I think any of us were expecting going into the movie and after those first 2/3. In my opinion, as far as the narrative goes, the third act saves Onward without a doubt, and a lot of the emotional connection that you'd end up feeling with a Pixar film, I already talked about it, those moments that I'm talking about, they're all in the third act, and the relationships between fathers and sons, and even that between brothers, you see those themes in there. But again, it's the way that it's tackled and introduced that made it more potent, and if I'm just basically saying it, what made it more good. And the thing that I was most critical with the pants earlier, like I said, they were able to make me really get back, make me think back on how I viewed the situation, and it was effective as far as getting me to alter my opinion in a positive way. As for the acting, Tom Holland and Chris Pratt do a very good job as the two lead brothers. Tom Holland's character was the one that I had the least amount of fun with for a while, only because he had the more predictable and cliche coming-of-age story. But it did get better as the film went on, just like everything else got better within that context. But as far as my favorite character in there, it's between two people. I think it slightly edges out to Chris Pratt, because Chris Pratt's character he just plays this uber nerd who lives by this Dungeons and Dragons style game that he claims is based off of historical fact, which kind of, from the evidence that we've seen and the fact that there's actual real-world applications in the world, obviously it at least is to a certain degree. So once this magical quest begins, he takes on the mantle of the expert, and I loved his energy. It was plus, after a while, I forgot that it was Pratt who was voicing him. He's always been really good at embodying an animated character ever since he first voiced Emmett in the Lego Movie, and just for that part, and because I honestly love those uber nerdy characters, it's the funny thing, his build and his voice kind of sounds like maybe a jock, but he talks like a nerd, and I love it. But anyway, moving on to the next one. The second one, big shout out to Octavia Spencer as the Manticore. The Manticore was such a hyperactive character who was mostly worried about her restaurant getting bad reviews, and I don't know, it was funny. It felt kind of real, grounded, and relatable. I think I laughed at the humor involving her the most consistently. And as always, I have to say it, Pixar once again shows that they are the best at animation when it comes to the details. They are at the point where the background animation and things like vehicles just look photorealistic. Sure, it does clash more with the cartoony characters that inhabit the world, similar to The Good Dinosaur, but it works much better in Onward. It melded better, at least, instead of feeling like it's animation styles for two separate films. And I'm not counting this as a con, but I'm just pointing this out. I'm kind of disappointed that I didn't have a moment like in Toy Story 4, where Woody and Bo are under the car, and you could just see the animation in the back, and it looks so fucking photorealistic that I cried during that part because it was just so beautiful. Sadly, I didn't have anything like that in this movie, but I'm not going to count that as a complaint. That's a superficial thing. As far as how I would rank this movie compared to the other films in Pixar's history, without using a number system, because I don't personally like using number systems. I know I tried it for a while when I first started the channel, but it never really worked for me. I don't know, I don't have a proper way of grading. I know that nobody really does, but, you know, it just didn't feel right for me. But anyway, rambling, I would say that this is around the same for me as Monsters University, which I was worried about earlier, but I guess, in a way, you know, I still got a good movie. It's serviceable with the good moments. It's not the best, but it's definitely not the worst. And I think your mileage will depend on your own personal feelings towards the plight of these two brothers and how quickly you get attached to the idea that they are escorting around pants. And I believe that some people will come away from this and think, similar to me, that the majority was serviceable, but that the last 30 minutes or so were much better and saved the movie. And then there will be, I feel like there will also be some people who think, sure, the last 30 minutes were an improvement, but I don't think it necessarily fit with what came before, because it's something in the story that kind of comes out of nowhere and changes what the story was initially suggesting that the full plot was. And if you have that opinion, I actually understand. I don't necessarily, what is it? I'm blanking on the word. I don't follow that train of thought, but I understand where you're coming from with that. But, you know, as for me, like I said, though I wasn't as emotionally connected to the film for the most part, and I found much of the narrative to be kind of a lackluster quality, I can't deny the mastery of the voice acting, the animation, and the third act, which, as I said in my opinion, saved the movie for me. So I do recommend this movie for you guys. It's good, just don't expect one of those higher tier Pixar stories. Anyway, guys, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. Don't forget to hit that like button and that subscribe button if you haven't already. And as always, farewell until the next video, all of you casual moviegoers and movie fans alike, and keep on being awesome.